Aircraft of Alaska, Part 1, a photographic essay presented as a PowerPoint slideshow. Photos and narration by Tom Hildreth. Aviation in Alaska. There are more than 400 public airports in the state of Alaska. There are more pilots per capita than in any other state. 10% of all jobs in the state, that's 47,000 jobs, are involved in aviation, and this represents 8% of the state's gross domestic product. Alaska residents fly 8 times more often than in other states. Taking a quick look at the airports in Alaska, the major ones, we'll first talk about the Ted Stevens International Airport at Anchorage. Operations began here in 1951. Located astride the Great Circle navigation routes between Asia and North America, this airport is ideally located for a heavily loaded jumbo jet freighter to make a refueling stop. In tonnage, this is the second largest air cargo facility in the United States. There are greater than 500 wide-body cargo landings per week. That's about one every 20 minutes on average. 3 long runways can be found here, one of 12,400 feet length, a parallel runway of 10,600 feet, and a third runway of 10,900 feet. This is a Boeing 747 departing Anchorage, operated by Cincinnati-based Southern Air. This is a Boeing 747 operated by UPS. This is a Super DC-3, and it's operated by Trans-Northern out of Anchorage. This particular aircraft was built as a DC-3 of American Airlines, but it was not delivered. It entered Army Air Force service as a C-50 on 10 June 1941. On 3 June 1944, it was registered as NC-15579 as DC-3 flagship New Jersey with American Airlines. On the 15th of February 1949, it was rebuilt as the second prototype DC-3S, which was a Super DC-3. It had 9 or 10 different owners prior to residing at Anchorage as Trans-Northern's N-30 Tango November. This is an MD-1030F of FedEx departing Anchorage. Another wide-body freighter of UPS. This is an MD-11. And here we see a Boeing 747 of Nippon Cargo Airlines taxiing at Anchorage. Everett's Air Cargo. This is a Douglas DC-6 departing Anchorage. This is a Boeing 737 of Northern Air Cargo. They're headquartered at Anchorage, and we see this one taxiing in after landing. Alaska Airlines is probably the best known of Alaska's operators, operating into the lower 48 or parts thereof. This is a Boeing 737 departing Anchorage with Snow-capped mountains in the background. This is a Boeing 747 of Polar. This operator is headquartered at JFK Airport in New York. Here's another Boeing 747. This is of EVA Airways of Taiwan, departing Anchorage. Here's another Alaska Airlines Boeing 737, showing the native Alaskan on the tail, departing Anchorage. Under a low cloud cover, we see Trans-Northern Super DC-3 November 28 Tango November, delivered to the United States Army Air Force as C-47A 42-24345. It was transferred to the U.S. Navy as R-4D5 39080. It was converted to an R-4D8 in 1951 and was redesignated as a C-117D in 1962. It flies on today as a freighter out of Anchorage. This looks like a DC-3. It was delivered to the United States Army Air Force as a C-47A, built in Tulsa on the 27th of March 1944. This aircraft served in combat in North Africa and returned to the USA on the 20th of August 1945. It served with various airlines post-war, and it began service as a freighter with Anchorage-based Desert Air, able to carry up to 6,500 pounds and get in and out of runways as short as 2,800 feet. Desert Air serves more than 200 Alaskan airports with Tundra tires on its DC-3. Here's another Southern Air Boeing 747. And another aircraft from the Southern Air fleet departing Anchorage. Here's an EVA Airways MD-11F freighter. Again, this is a Taiwan-based freight operator. Looking rather nondescript, this Boeing 747 is operated by Southern Air. First flying in September 2009, this is FedEx's Boeing 777 FS2, known as the Panda Express. FedEx has provided special containers for the transport of the much-loved bears from south-central China to other locations in the world. Boeing 747 of Nippon Cargo Airlines. This is a FedEx McDonnell Douglas MD-11F. Not all the aircraft are jumbo jets. This is a 1994 Cessna C208 of Grant Aviation of Imanak, Alaska. Grant flies charter operations to nearly 50 destinations in Alaska and also flies scheduled service to 8 locations. The aircraft you see here is a Cessna Caravan. This is a Saab SF-340B of Anchorage-based Peninsula Airlines. This operator has a fleet of more than a dozen of these aircraft, as well as a few Cessna Caravans. To my surprise, I learned they operate to 4 northeastern U.S. destinations from Boston, and also have a West Coast USA service to at least 6 destinations in California and Oregon. This is a 1978 DHC-6300 Twin Otter. This is likely operated by Lattimore Enterprises of Juneau. Here's a Cessna Caravan of Grant Aviation. Here's another shot of the Trans-Northern Super DC-3 fleet. On a rather dark afternoon, this is a Boeing 747 freighter on its takeoff roll. On the same afternoon, here's a pan shot of an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737. And on final approach, this is a United Boeing 777. Naturally, a great deal of passenger traffic at Anchorage belongs to Alaska Airlines, which is headquartered at Seattle, Washington. This is a Boeing 737-790. November 251 Charlie Echo of Everett's Air Cargo was originally built for the Air Force as a C-118A Liftmaster in 1953. It was eventually transferred to the Navy and then entered the Civil Registry at some point. The big props of 251 Charlie Echo dig into the Alaskan air and present aviation enthusiasts from around the world with the anachronistic scene they crave, a large piston engine airliner making a revenue flight. This is Charlie Echo as it departs Anchorage. Here we see a Boeing 747 of UPS taxiing at Anchorage. Hong Kong-based Cathay Pacific Boeing 747 departs Anchorage and fills the viewfinder in the process. When you're at the perimeter fence at Anchorage, you learn the local fauna is jumbo-sized also. Lockheed L-100 382G Hercules, one of a half dozen of these aircraft operated by Linden Air Cargo. This is a de Havilland, Canada DHC-8 of Era Aviation, based at Ted Stevens International. This airline operated scheduled services to 15 more designations in Alaska, and now operates as Raven, R-A-V-N, Alaska. Here's an Emirates Air Cargo Boeing 747 departing. Another Alaskan Airlines Boeing 737. Here's Alaskan Airlines Make-A-Wish aircraft. With a special paint scheme. I don't know what's behind this color scheme, but apparently Alaskan has a special run involving the Make-A-Wish organization. Here's a Singapore Airlines Cargo Boeing 747 taxiing in. A Korean Air Cargo 747 climbing steeply out of Anchorage. And this is Atlas Air's Boeing 747-47UF taxiing in at Anchorage. Atlas is headquartered at JFK in New York and is the world's largest operator of Boeing 747 freight aircraft. Here's another UPS MD-11 freighter departing Anchorage with the snow-capped mountains in the background. This is an MD-11F, November 254. McDonnell Douglas MD-11F of Shanghai Airlines Cargo. According to Wikipedia, This operator was established in 2006 and along with Great Wall Airlines has been merged into China Cargo Airlines. Here's a Boeing 767 of UPS making a stop at Anchorage. Built in 1958, this is DC-68 November 9056 Romeo of Everett's Air Cargo departing Anchorage. Adjacent to the Ted Stevens International Airport at Anchorage is the Lake Hood Seaplane Base. This is the largest seaplane base in the world. There are more than 1,000 aircraft based at this airport. It has one gravel runway and 3 water runways. The closest aircraft here in this picture is the 1975 Cessna A185F, and it's seen in a typical Lake Hood setting. Here's a 1955 Piper PA-18. And later in the day, a 1976 Cessna U206F. Taxiing on Lake Hood, here's a 1958 Cessna A175. Many bush planes use the gravel strip at Lake Hood, such as this 1946 Piper PA-12. Note the size of the tires that enable the aircraft to land on gravel surfaces and rough surfaces with a very light footprint. Here's a 1968 Piper PA-18, 150 horsepower. And this is a 1943 Interstate, according to the FAA records. Here we see a 2007 American Champion Model 8G CBC, another bush plane at the Lake Hood Airport. This is a 1980 Cessna U206G. Piper PA-14 at Lake Hood, with another aircraft taking off from the water behind it. Here's a 1942 Grumman G-44 Widgeon. The Widgeon is from an extensive family of Grumman amphibious flying boats. Unlike a float plane, the lower fuselage on the Widgeon is a boat hull, and there are wing-mounted floats for stability in the water. Here is a 1958 de Havilland DHC-2 Beaver at Lake Hood. The Beaver is a Canadian-built utility aircraft that dates to the late 1940s. It remains a useful aircraft for the bush, and demand is such that it has been placed back into production after a hiatus of many years. Here we see a Helio Courier, a 1950s aircraft designed in Massachusetts and produced in Kansas as a short field performer. Here's a Cessna C-208 Caravan of Rust's Flying Services. Established in 1963, today Rust's lists a fleet of a couple of dozen aircraft of several different types. They have always supported the sportsman, but have expanded to include sightseers with offerings such as bear watching trips, landing on a glacier in Denali Park, and photo safaris. Here's the Caravan seen in this picture beginning its takeoff run. Another of Rust's aircraft, in this case a 1980 Cessna U206G, taxis out for an early morning departure at Lake Hood. Here's a 1975 Cessna U206F taxiing on Lake Hood. Here we see a 1978 Cessna U-206G of Regal Air. This operator has a fleet of Cessna and Beaver floatplanes, as well as a twin-engine Piper Navajo. Regal offers flight seeing operations, flights to lodges, photo safaris, Iditarod tours, and national park eco-trekking. While waiting for the next float plane to taxi out, I heard a noise in a tree behind me. Suddenly, this eagle launched from the tree, and I was able to snap this shot as it flew by. Larger than a de Havilland beaver, this is their DHC-3 turban otter. Here's a beaver sitting at the dock on Lake Hood. Here's a pretty 1949 Grumman G44A widgeon on the tarmac at Lake Hood. And a beaver November 5-5 Whiskey Echo. Originally built in 1952 for the U.S. military as an L-20A, this aircraft sits on its floats at White Wings Aircraft Services at Lake Hood. As I said earlier, the Beaver remains a sought-after platform. Here's a Piper PA-31 Navajo of Katmai Air at Lake Hood. Another beaver. And another widgeon. This photo represents a bit of an optical illusion. November 31 Tango November is a 1969 Beech 99 commuter job. The floats are in the foreground, not attached to the aircraft. If they were, they'd be on backwards anyways. And here's a pretty beaver. Once again, this shows us there are many at the airport. They are very popular for bush operations. Here's a big turban otter of Rust's. And another of their turban otters on floats at the dock. And you can see from this shot that Rust's is a busy operation. This is their facility on Lake Hood. In recent years, the Civil Air Patrol has upgraded its fleet with the addition of the Australian-built Gippsland GA-8. In this case, November 472 Charlie Papa, which is seen at Lake Hood Airport. Fairbanks International Airport. Operations began here in 1951. There's an 11,800-foot runway with a 6,500-foot parallel runway that has a tandem 2,900-foot ski strip, and there is a 5,400-foot parallel water runway. At midday, an Alaskan Airlines Boeing 737 sits at Gate 1 at Fairbanks. I arrived from the lower 48 at 10:20 p.m. on the 2nd of June, and the sun was still pretty high in the sky. An Anchorage-based Era Aviation Beech 1900D is about to start engines on the ramp at Fairbanks. Brooks Fuel at Fairbanks was known for its hospitality to aviation enthusiasts. They operated a very interesting fleet of piston engine transports. The distant aircraft in this photo is C-54D, November 3054 Victor, originally built as Army Air Force 42-72442 one of 380 C-54D-1 DC military Skymaster transports built at the Douglas Chicago plant. It was originally delivered to the Royal Air Force as Skymaster 1, Kilo Lima 977, during World War II. In July 1946, it was assigned to the U.S. Navy and eventually was sold on the U.S. Civil Registry. Here's a closer shot of November 3054 Victor of Brooks Fuels. A head-on shot of C-54E November 96358, showing its four 2,000 cubic inch piston engines. That's just under 33 liters per engine. Built at the Douglas Santa Monica plant as C-54E 449058, this aircraft was one of 20 delivered to the U.S. Navy as an R-5D4. It was assigned Bureau of Aeronautics number 90398 during that period of service. Brooks Fuels operated it as November 96358. Here's a close-up of Brooks Fuels C-54E 96358. The aircraft is finished in the classic Douglas scheme of the early 1940s. Had it been sold to an airline, it would have been designated as a DC-4. Unfortunately, Brooks Fuels ceased operation in August of 2011. A tantalizing find for the aviation enthusiast, Brooks Fuels was home to this single example of the DC-7C. This model was appropriately named the 7 Cs when it entered service in June of 1956. It was the ultimate development in long-range piston-engine passenger aircraft. Here's another shot of the DC-7III. This appears to have been sold to the French independent operator TAI as a new aircraft around 1958. TAI had been assigned the responsibility of preserving a link to France's far-flung possessions in the Pacific. On the 4th of February 1957, TAI flew a DC-6B through Saigon from Europe to Auckland, New Zealand on the world's longest scheduled flight. That it took 4 days to accomplish this shows that better equipment was needed. This may be why DC-7C 45367 was given French registration FBIAQ with TAI as the operator. A few years later, it was one of 3 such aircraft being operated by the French government during nuclear weapons tests in the Pacific as a monitor aircraft. Another interesting operator at Fairbanks is Everett's Air Cargo. Their fleet of large piston-powered freighters is likely the biggest in the world, numbering about 24 DC-6 4-engine aircraft and at least a half-dozen Curtiss C-46 twin-engine freighters. A number of more modern types are flown also. Here's a shot showing the port side of an Everett's Air Cargo DC-6 and the cargo door partially open. This is Everett's Air Fuel, November 7780 Bravo, bearing the likeness of Howard Hughes and the name The Aviator on the nose. Transporting fuel by air in Alaska is very common. The outlying settlements and villages need fuel for all the reasons that we would need fuel here, for heat, well, there aren't very many surface vehicles, but perhaps snowmobiles and whatnot, and in most cases it's brought in by air. Here's a close-up of the port side of the Aviator. This is DC-68 Good Grief. with a drawing of Charlie Brown on the nose. Here's a Cessna Grand Caravan of Everett's Air Alaska. As we see, not all of their aircraft are large piston engine transports. Here's a more modern type. It's an Embraer EMB 120 QC Brasilia, a twin-engine turboprop made in Brazil and very popular as a commuter aircraft, and apparently Everett's has an idea of operating some of these perhaps as small freighters or maybe as passenger aircraft also. This is an ex-DHL freight operator DC-9 32F on the ramp at Everett's. There were two of them there at the time of my visit. Apparently they are considering using these on some of their runs. This sharp-looking freighter served the U.S. Navy in an earlier life as an R6D1 131609. From 1962, it was known as a C-118B. In this shot, we see parts aircraft that crowd the back ramp at Everett's. During my visit, I was told they were scouring the world for parts for these venerable aircraft and were confident they would be operating them into the foreseeable future. Here's a head-on view of a DC-6. And this is hot stuff, a Curtiss C-46F. This large twin-engine aircraft was built as 44-78565 for the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II. Here's a close-up of hot stuff. Engine number 4 fires up with the characteristic smoke bellowing from the exhausts on Good Grief, Charlie Brown. The destination on this flight was several hundred miles away. Ongoing engine work in the Everett's hangar. This is a good shot for the curious. In the foreground is an engine mount for a DC-6. To the left, just behind it, is the back end, the accessory end, of a Pratt & Whitney R2000 engine. And to the right of that, with the yellow seal on it, is an R2800 coupled to a mount. Here's a Beech 1900C of Frontier Flying Services, which is based at Fairbanks. DC-6 November 100 Charlie Echo, an ex-C-118A. This aircraft went to the boneyard on March 25, 1976. It was transferred to the U.S. Navy in March of 1976 and then was sold on the civil registry as November 51599. Exactly when Everett's got a hold of it, I'm not sure. This is the analog world of an operational DC-6, in this case November 100 Charlie Echo. Today we jokingly call these steam gauges. As I stepped out of the cockpit of November 100 Charlie Echo, I looked over the old freighter's starboard wing, and I saw this Boeing 767 of Condor taxiing for takeoff. You have to have confidence to name a photograph. I'm naming this one generations apart. There are no steam gauges in the 767, I'm sure. The end.